Welcome everyone in both universities. Thank you for coming to this the first Disability Futurity talk to take place actually at Carleton. We there was a little change. I'm just going to inform the audience here at Carleton. A scheduling conflict meant that Liverpool Hope University wasn't able to attend, so they send their best and look forward to watching the video and engaging on the comments. But we're thrilled and lucky to have Newman University coming to us from Birmingham. So welcome, and a big thank you to Dr. Helen Davies, the head of English, for making this happen at very short notice. Great to have you with us. It's my pleasure. I'm standing as I block the. It's my pleasure to introduce Mick Seely-Quest, our speaker today. Seely's work focuses on embodied encounters and representation in live theater. She also brings environmental and sustainability issues into conversation with disability studies, which is something I find particularly interesting. A published poet, curator, and widely toured performer, she's engaged with audiences in Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, where her current home base, and many U.S. cities, particularly in Oakland and the Bay Area. And we are very fortunate to have here with us today. So welcome, Seely. Please take it away.
Thanks. I'm going to have that dilemma of where do I look? So might be going all around, and bear with me. Okay, so a bit more introducing for myself, just to say up front that I'm sorry I have not formatted yet the text for all this in best fonts for, let's say, different sorts of visual processing, but that is something that I can do after actually speaking, and as far as disseminating something that feels more accessible for people to read, I'm happy to be in contact about that. I'm gonna also just introduce a bit about myself up front, and I'm happy to speak to it more later if there's questions, because I feel like this is something that's relevant for kind of overall context for my work. I've never joined social media, and I've, for some years, have some ambivalence about that, but it still felt good enough that I've continued on that tack. I do what research I can outside of having access to a lot of content that's on social media platforms. And so, yeah, just bear in mind that what I share sometimes is a bit behind the curve, actually, of when some other people latch on to different news or developments. But I also, yeah, I think I'm providing some example of work that people can do from outside that sphere. So, okay. And sorry, last, just up front for now, I am particularly cripped out today. So I'm really gonna proceed my best, but this is not as formally outlined of a whole piece as I might otherwise have worked on preparing. I just decided to be gentle with myself about having kind of eclectic sharing of material here, given quite a bit of fatigue and such that I'm experiencing. But to get into it, I'll do a bit of reading from and we'll see where it goes from there. In this seminar, I did decide to build upon some notes that I had presented a few years ago at the Canadian Association for Theatre Research's 2017 conference. That was for a panel called Metamorphic Magic, Performing Objects, Agency, and Ecologies. This context gets set up in quoting an interview from the Creative Capital blog. Creative Capital is a pretty actually influential organization in the US for funding a whole lot of artists working in different milieus. One of them being a sculpture and performance artist, Black woman who uses the name Kenya and then her last name in parentheses, Robinson. So from this 2017 blogged interview, she said to Alex Tepliski, quote, "I knew when Barack Obama first got elected as president, part of my tears that came had to do with joy. That was 15%. And then 85% of these tears was shame because I didn't think this election was going to happen at all." And I was like, wait a minute, that's dangerous because that has to do with my imagination. That is something I can nurture. In spite of anything else that might be happening in our world, I can't imagine things. And especially as an artist, you have to nurture that. Alex responds, "We had this panel at the Creative Capital office about mass incarceration. And one of the artists was talking about the greatest danger of using artistic practice to address these issues is encouraging the audience to feel good about doing nothing. They see the art installation and feel horrible, but after that, kind of check out." So Kenya responds, "Create a tool for engagement. The question is how to work that imagination." And that's my emphasis. And now, can I get this to scroll? Okay, great. So, why do I intro with this? I find some work in disability studies, or in futurist analysis for that matter, ends up encouraging audiences to check out of consciousness about ways to actually proceed with improving material conditions. My scholarship and activism goals emphasize that we all have agency to act imaginatively and to contribute to new world making. Theater is a tool of primary interest for me, but in the course of this talk, I certainly attend to studying performance broadly and also to other dimensions of social studies. To consider this seminar series theme of futures inherently invokes considering ecological concerns. So I'm going to go up front into some notes on lower tech, less environmentally depleting materials and performative inventions that engage, let's say, non-normative embodiments. As those of us atypical of body or mind, often hiding questions of agency and of resources extracted for us, disabled people have the opportunity to demonstrate leadership in sharing our skills in adaptability and resourcefulness, and to contribute to innovating social futures that meet everyone's basic needs while going actually beyond net zero ecosphere impacts to regenerative impacts. Interestingly, I do not have a few words there, but I will just say, the name of this band, let's pull it back up. That's right. Benda Belili was a group of street musicians who lived and played around zoo grounds in Kinshasa, Congo. This group of musicians was led by 4 men with post-polio paraplegia. They're riding customized tricycles and wheelchairs, and for all I know, they're still doing so today. Just the band as a group is no longer operating. So these older men with paraplegia, and then also a young guy joined this ensemble. He used a milk can to build a one-string lute. Members from this group have gone on to continue playing in different bands today. Some promotion I found really interesting from their 2009 debut album states, Ricky, 55, he's the founding member of staff Benda Bilili and keeps the band together with his energy and ingenuity. He still sells cigarettes and alcohol outside nightclubs straight from his tricycle. He also sometimes works as a mechanic and a tailor. He often sleeps on the street, on cardboard, but always manages to dress very smartly. Then speaking of another member, Theo's family lost everything with the fall of the Mobutu regime. He then had to hit the streets and become an electrician, which in Kinshasa is a semi-magical, Robin Hood-esque occupation consisting of redistributing power between neighborhoods by running long makeshift cables in the mud at night. Third profile, Roger is 17. A former street kid, he was adopted by Ricky many years ago. He created his own instrument, of a guitar string tense between the drum of a tin can and a wooden bow inserted in its base. The members of the band noticed Roger's uncanny musical talent and proceeded to teach him song structures and melodies. Benda Bilili means, quote, look beyond appearances, literally, put forward what is hidden. And this is text that I gathered from their Cram Records label page. Going to the full photo here by Guillaume. I would note that these performers use musical, theatrical, and mechanical craft practices that make much out of little, and their adaptations with objects are crucial to their charm and success. This photo below shows group members posed outside in sand, smiling at the camera. Several men are seated with chairs and a trike. Several also stand with drums, guitars, and crutches. A young man sits in front with a white can and a curved bow jutting from its side. So let's compare what's put forth about these folks with another artist who performed striking work with secondhand objects, Lisa Bufano. Lisa was in the San Francisco Bay Area-based Access Dance Company. After a life-threatening infection, she recovered from below knee and finger amputations and began performing while playing with prostheses. One of her iconic limb augmentations was using legs of a Queen Anne table. She made a duet with a fellow Access dancer having full legs and fingers, for them both to use a set of table legs like stilts and explore the four-legged animal effect. Their dance, Was It a Dream I Loved, riffing off Nijinsky's Afternoon of a Faun, invoked faun experience. The cream color of their tufted fabric outfits also suggested goat fur and Bufano's allusion to being hybrid, half human, half goat. This image below with Saint-Charest Giles from 2012 shows two petite women, one with red hair wearing shorter table legs in back, one with dark hair wearing full table legs. They're both wearing halter top garments that expose their backs, while the garment bottoms have puffy fullness and take up space and contrast. They're bent over facing each other, the crown of Lisa's head in contact against Saint-Charest's forehead. In another image, Bufano spins a steampunk costume, highlighting the fittings of the leg ends to her body, and the mechanical and antique effects. This shows her solo, presenting to the camera a wind-up toy style, in laced arm gauntlets, a metal hoop skirt frame, and a vintage helmet with wires to a scope lens positioned over one eye. And sizing of the photo is a little tricky to get it all on the screen, but I'll go do a little up and down, you can get the idea. So we have, and when exactly in her career overall, did she set up this photo? I don't have a date for that. Mid 2000s. Beyond simply realistic artificial limbs, Bufano's affinity toward original use of existing crafted items facilitated her array of physical and aesthetic impacts. She got some assistance in establishing custom fittings of these table legs to her limbs. Yet one could say the scavenger approach to supplies is shared with the members of staff Benda Bilili. However, Bufano's work has gotten more attention in the field of disability arts, which I'd say has to do with being in the global north. Having an associated narrative focused on the uniqueness of disability aesthetics and their legitimacy as a category employed by professional artists. Here I want to make a point regarding the separation of legitimate, capital A, art by disabled people as recognized in the art world, and practices of art therapy, folk art or craft work, and fan art making by disabled people. This separation, the effort to do this, is fueled by capitalism, by naming as distinct artistic output that merits locating professional artists with upper class markets, while dismissing art making that's considered to happen just for the sake of therapy. Sean Lee, programming director at Tangled Arts and Disability Gallery in Toronto, which is the premier fine arts and performance art space in Canada dedicated to disabled artists, made some statements last year that I would say didn't seem to consider the implications of casting disability art as something elevated and not merely art generated in therapeutic contexts. I would argue, as we move into a post-capitalist future, and here I simply mean that I believe the capitalism we currently live in will discontinue in my lifetime, that we must instead embrace and amplify practices of arts which are associated with therapy. The need for therapeutic pursuits and for arts engagement to feel accessible will grow. Valuing contributions from many kinds of disabled and non-disabled arts community people also motivates my move toward collaborative script devising, as I'll describe later. There are many examples of low-tech, low ecological impact designs for daily and performative use for people with and without disabilities. Laura Brody organized a project in the US called Opulent Mobility to feature art that adapts mobility devices beyond mere utility. This exhibit includes a piece by a parent of a teenage son. The son uses a motorized chair, which makes his means of transport a magical object. This piece design, too, draws on the possibilities within steampunk aesthetics of cobbling together remnant elements. Brody, the curator, her image description is below. Okay, so again, the size of the image is a tad large for our screen, but you can get the idea. The builder of this costume, we're calling it, Penny Richards. This piece is called the Steampunk Submarine, built for her son's wheelchair in 2014. So the Steampunk Marine is mounted to a plain aluminum wheelchair. It sticks out in front and in back of the chair. This costume attaches to the wheelchair frame with Velcro closures and twist ties. It has a flat back and a rounded oval front that curves into points at both ends. There's a clock nose in front and a clear plastic salad bowl window in the middle for the wheelchair rider to see through. There's a cardboard tube periscope on top and a pinwheel propeller at the rear. The wheels are decorated with spiral painted hubcaps that spin along with the tires. The submarine is made of cardboard and edged in tape. It is painted copper with many attached recycled tins, knobs, and dials. And this is cited at the website page about it, opulentmobility.com, Penny Richards. Another simple object that I really find rich for exploring and which has metamorphic applications is a low-angle ramp. Sarah Hendren, who's a professor of engineering and art practice based outside Boston, designed a portable ramp of wood with metal finishing, just enough to fit the height of a standard one-step. This ramp set at one-step pathways can allow access up for wheelchair users, yet it also can stack in a set of multiple low ramps due to inset anchoring at the sides, and thus together create a much higher angled ramp. This configuration is one way they can be used by skateboarders and by people performing stunts with or without wheels off of these nesting wedges. The montage of images below show the ramp in one arrangement, elegantly stacking atop each other. In another, laid out side by side to create one low, wider ramp surface. And in another, set back to back to create a brief rise with a slide up one side and down the other. Hendren states, they form a suite of objects for installation in public space, both as a mode of critical play and critical access, for use by skateboarders whose radical leisure tends to be unwelcome in urban centers, and wheelchair users in search of ramps for single-step entrances, a common access problem in cities like Boston and New York. Certainly, as well, Montreal, Toronto, pretty much any other major East Coast city I've encountered. I'm interested in the ramp as a social technology, a nimble and portable tool for both scripted and unscripted uses. And this is part of Hendren's write-up on her webpage, slopeintercept.org, about. The versatility here is potent. Alice Shepherd, some of you may know her work, originally from the United Kingdom, is another dancer, formerly with Access Dance as well. She has recently been pushing the aesthetic and virtuosic potentials of ramped stage designs for her wheelchair choreography, playing with the gain of momentum on slopes to execute thrilling maneuvers. Yet this work, getting attention, helps highlight what we could do collectively with simply more building and porting of ramps. So, a couple last things I want to note, just again, more particularly to the issue of ecological attention in our work. The growing wealth of examples of minimally depleting theatrical materials for disability engaging art, and even more examples for those just designing for ecologically committed audiences. I would certainly recommend all read a 2016 essay titled Inspired by Trash, Finding a New Path to Tradition, Ethics, and Sustainability in Puppetry by Amanda Peatfish-Schrag. And I have a link to it posted here to explore the links through the site of Australian stage designer Tanya Beer, who has advanced what she calls, quote, eco-scenography. This concept is staging productions with materials to be consumed or recycled. And absolutely a great resource are charts available at this toolkit for download at the sustainablepractice.org website for rating environmental impacts of different kinds of theater production materials. I can say more about these sources afterwards if people want to discuss. It is on us to link efforts with all who are conjuring more inventively. So now I'm going to segue. Again, if I was feeling a bit more resourced, I might have link these a little more subtly, but just decided to kind of block off a couple different things that I wanted to share. And so I will just give some introduction to one of the projects I've been working on more long term at this point. That is a theater piece that explicitly centers disability, which I alluded to a bit in my my write-up for presenting this seminar. So this piece, well, it is also as yet untitled, and I will say why. It is going to be primarily yielded through devising with the performers involved. So I have yet to determine whether this script will be 1 or 2 acts long. What I do know is it will be a two-hander, so just featuring 2 characters, a model and a photographer who both have physical disabilities. The premise centers questions of the body, of consent, sexual desire, sex work, and labor dynamic ambiguities regarding employment hierarchies versus art co-creation. I expect collaborating in developing the script with the performers and through workshopping with trained and with untrained community participants to feature characters with disability who are in tension with each other. The characters are intended to not have assigned genders also, so that power dynamics will translate differently when this gets cast in different ways with genderqueer, trans, homo, or hetero cisgender pairings. It's yet to be determined how experimental the script will become. I am interested to discuss with participants the potential of A, let's say, playing the model, and B, the photographer one time, and then A and B switching those roles for the next run. What is set with the characters is that the model is impacted by spinal curve and the photographer by an even more perceptible condition. So they both have fairly typical physical mobility and sensory function, but this photographer may have a short arm, atypical number of fingers, a limp, a prosthetic of some kind, a stutter, perhaps a recurring tremor, etc. This photographer character holds a camera in my current writing for extended durations and does move from standing to sitting with relative speed. But the casting may entail modifications like more tripod use to depend on an actor's limb availability. The bottom line is that performers in different readings will tailor it according to their physicalities. So I have not, I'm in a script development workshop at this time, and will continue doing some writing through this workshop over the next couple months, and of course beyond then. But so far, after starting this, first time the idea for this in 2008, it's been very slow in coming along, and I have about 12 pages of draft written, but it has become very important to me in this project to yield more the development in exercises with, again, people who have perhaps some amount of professional experience with acting, but also disability community members who do not, and to try out practices of, okay, let's say you are this character encountering this particular scenario with the other one. What might you anticipate yourself doing if you were inhabiting this kind of role? And just going with a lot of different exercises for generating a diverse body of ideas. And in this way, I'm hopeful that there will be a feeling of some more collective investment in storyline. I am not interested in the singular narrative by myself as one author here, and negotiating the power dynamics not only in the content of the script between the characters, but it's something that will be modeled and an ongoing experiment in the creation of the work as well. So yeah, again, I imagine this coming through workshops with potentially lay people. Also to do some of the creating work with artists who might identify as abled rather than disabled. Inviting small groups to come together to read and respond to sections of the script, to facilitate improvisation exercises, exploring what it's like to embody these dilemmas and intimacies. The play shops will help prompt more of the script and eventual casting. I do have a social practice agenda to build this investment in the process of making work together and in continuing public conversation about the issues of desire and exposure. By the end of a time in residency together, a first version of complete script would ideally be ready for a stage reading. I'm anticipating this. It's something that I would like to debut in Montreal, but I see this project touring to different iterations of casting, of development process in different cities across Canada, potentially in the US as well. To be determined if there might be some future manifestation in the UK. I feel pretty strongly about concerns of environmental impacts of long distance travel, and so would need to explore what might be possible for a lower impact option for travel when making such a visit. And of course, take into consideration accessibility needs of any people I might travel with, and consent for all involved. What I can also report about what's happening with this so far, everybody I have discussed it with, any potential collaborators, do express hunger about exploring this material and to have it, manifest in public performances. Having support to do this with actors who actually identify as disabled is key and will make a difference. I am not there yet. As it happens in Montreal, I have been pretty active in 2.5 years living there so far, exploring the professional English-based theater community. And to this point, I have not learned of anyone who is working in that community who identifies as having physical disability, who is out about that publicly at least. I anticipate this changing. I am aware of some participants in a current kind of like young emerging artists mentorship program with the Playwrights Workshop Montreal organization, which does a lot of development work with people at all ages and stages. And there are a couple, maybe a few younger emerging theater creators who are now identifying with having an experience of disability in some way and being out about that. So I'm really looking forward to connecting with more folks in that way, certainly in Montreal and afield. I would say, just to kind of give a little pitch about it, that engaging themes which include agency and oppression, hierarchy among people with bodily variants, pursuit of authentic connection, and of people with disabilities being both honest and inventive about our experiences. I'm looking forward to continuing to pursue dedicated space to progress this work that will yield aesthetic, structural, and political possibilities for meaningful impact. Just to give a little synopsis. So the professional art model is named Marlowe and meets a new client for the first time at this photographer's home. The photographer's named Sandy. Upon arriving for the session and being told how to pose, Marlowe finds that Sandy wants to push boundaries and bring in sexual energy, which Marlowe didn't expect or agree to. Sandy interrogates Marlowe about Marlowe's relationship to body, disability, sexuality, exposure, and control. Marlowe is seduced enough to go along with the increasingly revealing requests, also challenged by Sandy, and responds by also approaching with personal questioning and physical contact, which unsettles Sandy. Sexual tension and sparring increases. They end up tempted toward breaking the professional agreement and having sex, yet also jarred by what they've uncovered about how pressures regarding disability and access to power drive each of them. The scenario ends ambiguously for now about what will happen between them, if they will engage carnally, find some safety with each other, or not trust what pulls them together. And I think it all fits that the Me Too movement has emerged since the time that I first got ideas percolating about this. There's that much more interest about the degree of challenges around consent, and I would say the ambiguity that can happen in scenarios like this, model and photographer working together, who's hired who, kind of what are the contract terms of their agreement in doing these kind of intimate shoots, and something that is still, I think, unique. There hasn't particularly been much narrative out there yet regarding what might change or be specific when the parties navigating these issues of pushing consent boundaries are people who live with physical disability and have their own relationships to exposure, to voyeurism, etc. All right, so that is a bit of hopefully enticement about this project, and I am certainly open for questions about it. I will last also drop in some intro about my intentions with kind of the other major script project I have in a pipeline right now. It is not as far along in development time-wise, but I've felt quite a lot of ambition since first getting this percolating in 2018. So here I would introduce this project, which is also using devising for script creation to create 4 episodes of a mini-series radio drama. And this is, again, a provocation to thought and action today on future sustainability. This mini-series of 4 episodes would be presented live, approximately 30 minutes each, also recorded, so not just for broadcast in the moment, but also available for distribution in a podcast format after the fact. They would be bilingual, being that this is something I'm locating in Montreal. A quarterly project seasonally. So what is the goal? To reflect a scenario to aspire working toward within, let's say, 15 years of today, 2020. These characters navigate living in a time of environmental and related social crises requiring daily addressing, but they continue collaborating successfully to do so. The social action has mobilized enough improvements for the tone to be not simply dire, nor sensationalized. It presents matter-of-factly. This plot is set in an urban, self-contained, post-capitalist eco-complex built in this near-term future scenario, roughly a kilometer square. Encloses housing apartments, a nearby large greenhouse, which has a mixed orchard, insect and animal populations, fiber and dye crops, beginning algae, mycelium, cellulose processing lab, etc. Increased extreme weather conditions have reduced the time people travel outside. Air filtering plants abound indoors, paired with increase of vegetable oil and vegetable and beeswax candle lighting. Building underground has expanded. Design for sheltered, vertical, and rooftop farming is maximized. So the episodes will depict developments both within this particular eco-complex community and those involving dynamics with a handful of peer communities located across the city, which are interacting with each other in a loosely federated network. 15 years along, the last mayor of Montreal realizes authority can't be kept in that role much longer and is encouraging residents to contribute to deliberative practices of governance decisions with councils. This drama focuses on city and micro-community realities, briefly indicating the province and nation-state, also transitioning to self-managing municipalities and confederation. The utility service of hydroelectric power supplied for city needs still operates. It's just supplemented by solar and mini wind turbine installations. One recurring plot point concerns how members of these different resident eco-complexes across the city are navigating cooperative maintenance of the Hydro-Quebec infrastructure. Sufficient electricity is one of the key things respective complexes must negotiate access to, as by this point in time, they aren't set up to meet all resident needs with self-generated supply. However, By 2035, other essentials of creating weather-secure architecture, water catchment and purification, biologic waste composting, metals recycling, ore smelting and forging, waste vegetable oil or algae biofueled vehicle engines for those which don't run electric, replacements for plastics and petrochemically based fabrics with polymers that are resilient until correctly activated to decompose, regional earth pigment and salt mining, subtropical greenhouse mini farms for rubber, avocado, olive, citrus, and coconut trees, etc., with net zero carbon impacts, have happened enough for southern Quebec residents to be close to self-supporting, minimally reliant on shipping and outside trade. I will note that we have the resources for all these things to actualize within 16 years, give or take. It's obviously what I'm describing. There's a lot of ambition required to get from here to there, but I am designing this project in order to spur recognition of, okay, these are things that I'm drawing on that all, in fact, are available with current data that we have about feasible technologies. It's about scaling up. So I call this scenario style speculative realism. A few more notes. Construction of and repurposing stock for housing is ongoing. Population grows as migrants seek cooler northern climates. Resources are shared. Life isn't simple, but is better now that a critical mass globally has switched to daily work at all sustainable means to remediate climate change effects. Projects that are inessential for food or water, healthcare, shelter, transport, and communications work, activities which require more electricity, such as digital video making, now happen seasonally when there's more solar supply. So the radio project will have a vlog series accompanying to profile participants and document some of the behind-the-scenes developments. There will be 4 or more actors. I'm imagining probably maybe 8 characters at most, so some double casting. Roughly an equal split of Francophone and Anglophone actors, and a framework of collaborating with one Anglophone and one Francophone scriptwriter to devise this plot together, performing a franglais script, which is reflective of common conversation dynamics in Montreal, not to mention Ottawa. The mini-series would be performed live as well as a stage reading for audience at each show. Simultaneously broadcast, I'm aiming for the CBC, and recorded for distribution. Incorporating Q&A with a live audience to follow each reading, which would also be recorded, and that material edited to contribute to the behind-the-scenes content. To support equity in both today, the present, and the future, I have a goal of at least 55% of the cast and also of production team to be people with disabilities, to foreground this kind of creative work as initiated by disabled artists like myself, and to actively support this narrative that disabled characters are part of our collectively established future. A similar goal is for at least 55% of the cast and production team to be people of color. As we note, Toronto now has a person of color majority. Trends suggest that in 15 years, racialized populations may well be majority also in Montreal. Performers will be actual Montrealers with at least some training in microphone acting, invested in the collaborative aspects of script generating and the project's contribution to productive world building. It seems that there will be need for at least a few hours with script writers drafting each episode, then continuing in conversation with the actors for all of them to put input ideas, what would be both realistic and engaging for plot developments. Part of this concept is that the steps of project participation and execution illustrate some of the models being presented in the near future scenario. That is, finding suitable people for a task and agreeing on the details of the task together happens through deliberation and in liaison with people who may have stakes in those decisions. The companion website would post links to the audio recordings, publish the quarterly scripts and transcripts of the question and answer sessions for deaf and other community members to access the content. Translations of English and French dialogue would be included with the text versions. Besides that blog content, it will also have a page of links to related resources, including information about contemporary participatory planning at municipal and borough levels, data about the ecological manufacturing technologies available now, news on racialized peoples and disabled peoples' contributions in these fields, etc. Inviting interactivity, the website will have a forum for sharing notes about actions residents take to build structures and practices highlighted in the mini-series. There'll be effort to promote it as a hub for national discussion, for spurring regional and neighborhood working groups to accelerate industrial and residential design shifts together. Another layer to add would be a page transparently noting actions taken to minimize the production component's climate impacts as much as possible and to track the carbon account. The site will remain active and keep recordings available once the year series concludes. So an aim is constructing premises to be as nonfiction as possible. Scripts featuring magical or currently impossible technological developments certainly can be inspiring, but I find often they get relegated to scenarios that can't be emulated in, quote, real life. So the dialogue is conversational. Narration alternates among different characters in present tense, primarily in first person, and also with the goal of being realistic as far as varying between higher intensity moments and calmer meditative ones. For a debut chance to have a bit of peer interaction around how to develop this work, I'm open for critique. One thing that I would put out that I've been starting to think through that I have questions around are use of sound, obviously being a radio drama format, that's key. One question being the use of sound effects, that these would likely include sounds like crickets, bee buzzing, poultry clucks, water splashes, and so forth. Also mundane sounds of enclosed domestic spaces. I am inclined toward what I'm calling futurist realism versus tilting this narrative too much with surrealist elements or constructing it with much focus upon artifice. However, given this convention of radio dramas and some current storytelling-based podcasts that use quite a lot of soundscapes and effects, which serve in marking listeners' experience and kind of separating this world that they're listening to from other realities with their signature elements. I find myself asking for content that is monologue and dialogue heavy. What can support enticing sonic experience that is persuasive and yet more based in documentary than a fantastical style. I would like to note that I have been glad to recently learn of work by the British Broadcasting Corporation in some shorter term podcast miniseries that are also they're strictly fictional, futurist based series, and seem to also be quite dystopic, which is not the angle I'm choosing, but audience in the UK or possibly here may be aware of one recent program from 2019 that I particularly appreciated called Forest 404. And what I appreciate about it was that there's seemed to be kind of a similar agenda of including not just the episodes of this dramatic content, but also building in a larger platform to include shorter recordings with interviews with like contemporary scientists, for example, to reflect on themes that have been raised in each of the respective drama episodes as they come along. Then there's opportunity with this series to switch into what I would describe with my project as more, quote, behind the scenes content. So building in kind of a broader listener engagement around how one may relate the issues raised to what people are studying and discussing today. And I really admire what, like, the amount of response that I understand has been happening from that BBC experiment. So I'm looking forward to developing further in this direction in Canada. And I'm gonna conclude for now and say that I'm really appreciative of the time and the opportunity here to give some introductory time to both some of my interests around ecological focus and kind of repurposing of materials and how that is being deployed by a variety of art makers with disabilities, as well as some notes on some particular passion projects of mine and how they both incorporate disability either as a central theme or in the making of. Thank you all so much.
Next.
Normally we find that if we just say, does anyone have any questions, it does get weird with the two things. So what I'm going to do is pass from institution to institution. So this is where I'll need someone to speak up if there isn't, of course, because I can't see you all. As our guests, I will start with you folks. Does anyone at, sorry, I'm getting weird about what camera I'm looking at. Are there any questions from Newman?
Not yet.
No. Can you see us?
Hey.
Oh, yay! That's great. Hi.
Gotcha. Hello.
Good stuff. Does anybody have anything to say at the moment? No, I didn't want to jump in.
It's formulating in my mind.
Well, first of all, thank you, Celia. I found your talk absolutely fascinating, and the projects that you're working on as well just sound absolutely brilliant. So I can't wait to hear more about how they unfold. I just wanted to go back to what you were talking about, kind of in the first part of your paper, and some of the artists artists, the disabled artists you were talking about, kind of invoking animal kind of human hybrids. Just because, and this is a bit of a self-indulgent question, so I apologise. It's just because I've been doing some reading recently around, the ways in which animals, like kind of, claiming animal, this concept of kind of people with disabilities actually kind of claiming animal, or the concept of becoming animal in disability studies, trying to kind of break down those kind of speciesist boundaries. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on that, really, as a sort of political, as a progressive strategy, because I find it really exciting, but because it's really new to me, I find it frightening as well. But that's probably just my ignorance. Do you know what I mean? Because because I'm working on kind of intellectual disability at the moment, and so the ways in which kind of the comparisons to animals have been used against people kind of with cognitive disability. And so do you know what I mean? So I'm just really interested to hear more about that and your views on that.
Yep. Yeah, I think the move is necessary toward elevating animal status, and to break down the derogatory association. It makes sense both in terms of understanding ourselves, humans, as part of just this larger, complex kind of multi-organism on the earth, right? And with every different species and phenomena of life having its essential part. There are arguments from both indigenous communities and animal rights communities. Obviously, there's a lot of relationship there, right? Like there's this entire history of just a quite different perspective of respect for other species more equally to our own. And so, I think the pushback is great and necessary. And what it requires, just some humility and some acceptance of, yes, humans have a lot of unique and amazing faculties, but we haven't worked out immortality yet, and possibly never will. And we live animal lives. Like that is part of our reality as well. So the way to deal with stigma against disabled people and this association with animal qualities is just to refuse the stigma of period.
Sure. No, cool. Thank you. That's really interesting to me. Thank you so much.
Yep.
We'll switch to Ottawa now. Does anyone present have a question? All right, I'll jump in then. Oh, yes.
Hi, Celie. Thank you so much for your talk. This is Drea speaking. I am really interested also in what you were talking about, art with a capital A versus the dismissal of art written by and for disabled artists or exploration of that. And I'm working on my thesis work, I'm talking about some of that ways of the non-disabled audience interpreting that. And I don't know if you had anything else that you'd like to share about like sort of like this authenticity model that people have when they see a disabled actor on stage, that they're just saying their autobiographical story, because that's one aspect of disability art, but that's not the totality of disabled art. So I don't know if you'd like to talk anything about that. And that's the end of my current thought.
Thanks for asking. Well, it seems to me you're talking about a couple of different things there. As far as, well, yeah, questions of authenticity. That's a demand that seems to always land quite strongly with performance sharers or art makers in different formats and mediums, that where the makers are, experience some kind of minoritized identity or status. Although really I think there's that kind of like craving that, arts absorbers, arts consumers just tend to, it's such a recurring thing, this like desire to know what is authentic and what is not, and how does it mean something differently if a piece is, reflective of someone's authentic truth versus a fictional fabrication. We need to have room for all the above. I am very interested in, I share that desire to encounter what I interpret as authentic, and, a true reflection of a creator's actual experience. There's something that's, allows for like one kind of channel of potential empathy to happen, or one sense of shared understanding that can be established through believing that such and such art came out of somebody's, known to be authentic experience. And I do find myself desiring that, certainly sometimes, but I think it's important to complicate what's in the field as well, and to not limit ourselves to that either, and that there obviously has to be room for art makers of any kind to get fictional, to fabricate, to get, fanciful and fantastical, and to be, to have room for that scope of imagination. And it's, I think the thing that we have responsibility to is just to stay in conversation and communication about what's what, and that doesn't mean necessarily always confirming absolutely, yes, such and such piece is completely grounded in real, authentic truth, whereas this other piece is not, but simply to acknowledge. I think like the most important part of the conversation to me is to treat with respect people having a desire to know, and to acknowledge that, and to then be transparent and maybe coy with it if we're wishing to, but just say, okay, yes, isn't it interesting that we have these desires and for both what is fantastical and to know it as such, and then to sometimes encounter what's ambiguous and kind of struggle and grapple with that too, knowing what is the truth and what is perhaps not. If that, yeah, that's speaking to part of your question. I guess I could say a bit briefly, if I can think it out, about another thing I think you suggested. Let's see. Yeah, again, so the division of kind of professional art, let's say, versus amateur. So that's one sort of binary terms that these categories get divided with. And the amateur work, quote, is where a lot of more like arts therapy stuff, where that's generated. Yeah, as I said, I really don't think it's ultimately helpful to anyone in the disability community to get particularly hung up on maintaining a division there. And similarly to the situation of pushing back on stigma around other animal species, yeah, we need an elevation in status for the value of art created under all kinds of conditions, not necessarily with professional training at all. And again, kind of appreciating the shared humbleness of the roots of our impulses toward art making is what allows a more generous possibilities for everyone.
Get back to Newman if there's any questions over there. Oh, thank you. If there's any questions over there?
Yes, I have. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. I was really interested in the photographer model scenario that you described. And I'm interested in seeing and being seen, the dynamic between those two states, because it sort of mirrors the relationship between the stage and the auditorium, which interests me, that dynamic.
Yep.
And the Grey Eye sisters, who, when Odysseus steals their eyeball, they can't see. And I sort of see the relationship between the stage and the auditorium as a sort of unity like that. And I was wondering, I was really interested that your scenario sort of ended in a sexual unity between the model and the photographer. And I write about the stage and the auditorium, but I tend to sort of leave sexuality out of it. But of course it's there, isn't it? What could you say more about that?
Yes, I can. So this script does some of my ideas, let's back it up and put it this way, do have to do with some of my authentic experience, but also not all. I worked as a figurative and photo arts model for 11 years part-time. So I've done quite a bit of negotiating, performing for both the camera and people to, you know, draw, paint, sculpt, etc. And I have a peer I haven't who's gone on to kind of other academic theorizing, who did work himself in figure art modeling for a time, and he's based in Toronto now, if I got it correctly. Apologies that I'm forgetting his name at the moment. This is part of my cognitive gap, but I'll look it up and can put it out because I want to credit him. Anyway, he had a really great insight about again these kind of distinctions and way of sort of socially dividing and kind of reifying and protecting this idea of fine art, like the classical nude tradition in art, and how the way that gets set up in the kind of ongoing practice of live figure drawing and painting is that the people who aren't participating, like who haven't, you know, committed to, okay, I'm showing up as an artist and I'm going to be present in this section, like creating a representation of the model. Everybody else is kind of blocked from view. Like this scenario of privacy is set up to not just allow this kind of free show of the model's nudity potentially. You know, you could also model in costumes, which I've done, but a lot of it is nude. And so yeah, kind of separating the access to the figure, the physicality of whoever's modeling, and at the same time, the people who are considered the artist in this situation, creating the representations. I think it can be also argued that the person serving as the model is an artist in an equally valuable and just different way. But in any case, the people who are, you know, creating the drawings, taking the photos, whatever, they might, you know, they are then at liberty in this context to come sometimes like quite close and get like, you know, do a fine kind of close-up drawing of somebody's crotch, like right next to them. So there's this kind of, you know, not just like, that's not the practice of every artist working on kind of refining their, you know, their human form rendering by any means. But what I'm trying to get at is there's a bit of social unwillingness to acknowledge that there is a certain amount of sexual frisson and intrigue and these power dynamics that do come into play in these spaces. Whereas if one is consuming or helping to make recordings of something that's being actually categorized as pornography, you know, then those dynamics are pretty upfront and explicit. But in these other performing contexts, when working as a non-pornographic model, but creating art that is intimate in some way, which happens very much in the theater stage as well, there's less clarity about who does have permission for what and what is socially acceptable around how to regard the exposure that the artist who are exposing themselves, how is one allowed to relate to that? Is it, strictly through just a only platonically based respect, or can it be consensual to have erotic interest, evident in the space in some way? These things get very complex, and that's why I wanted to develop this script to go into, some more unpacking of how these layers can show up.
I'm cognizant we're up on our at least originally stated time. So if anyone does have to go to class, don't feel free. Do you and Newman, do you have another 5 minutes if there are any other questions? Or
Yeah.
are you at kind of the hard out?
Yeah, no, I'm cool anyway. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So in that case, then, if in Ottawa, are there any remaining questions? I'll stick with it. I'll ask one myself then. If about this whole if you do Romeo and Juliet and the person playing Romeo has a physical disability, you don't need to reference it. Well, depending, I suppose, but you could in theory advertise at the very least the play and that not come up. When we're talking about live performance where dealing with issues of disability is part of the point.
Yeah.
What's your take on whether you, on the poster, on the flyer, on the emails that go out, saying it's about a disabled disability, or saying that the actors are disabled, or do you advertise it as a play about a photographer and a model, and no one knows that it's is there a risk of putting it in a disability box or not, or I just don't know. I can see that always being a question, of course, context specific. So really,
Yep.
what are your thoughts on that, whether you advertise it as disability linked or not?
Yep. There is a risk of it getting put in a box in a way that some people will find limiting. I'm strongly inclined, certainly in this case, although again, it would depend. I might feel differently depending on some different contexts. I think it's really important to let people who identify in the disability community know up front, this is a piece for and by us. Because otherwise, why would they know? If it was left just unstated and not advertised in any way. And I am so keen to have mixed audiences with as many different kinds of disabled people as possible who might feel able and interested to attend to this kind of work. So I think, it's quite important to be clear and just, let the world know up front, basically. And it's important for letting abled people know as well. Okay, this is something that they may not have encountered before, and it is worthy to encounter. And again, without kind of flagging the particular uniqueness of where the attention is, what it's focusing around, and who's helping to present it. Why, why would able audiences be all that interested in a generic piece potentially that would just be yet another story featuring yet more able performers?
Excellent points.
Yep.
Was there anyone else at Newman?
I can ask a question. It just sounds really interesting, your play, so thank you. We're really interested to find out more about that when it sort of takes shape and comes together. But I've just been looking at theatres, really mainstream theatres in the UK, and the idea of weaving access into a script. And because you mentioned kind of that you're really weaving disability into the script from the beginning in what you're writing. I was just thinking, how accessibility for the audience, whether that is a part of your thinking in that as well.
I have a little auditory processing challenge, and I don't feel like I quite heard all of what you were saying, but are you asking about what kind of access options might be in the design for the audience to experience, as well as what gets built in for the development with performing participants? Is that your question?
I think so.
Okay.
I think more and more here. So when in theatre, it's just becoming more and more common for sort of like captioning, audio description, to be weaved into the script from the beginning. And I just wondered if that's in your thinking with what you're writing.
Yes, and budget, right, is key and expands outward to include all of these measures, but that absolutely is the goal. I would say that, for example, after first, a debut iteration stages, eventually to hope to work out a French translation of the entire script is a goal. I feel really limited in Quebec without being able to share that with Francophone disabled audiences quite as equally. Yes, I would anticipate having sign language interpretation as well. So there would be LSQ when we get to the point of a French stage production, and ASL for the performances in English. There would be quite a lot of work, I think, for people creating live audio description, but hopefully in a provocative, enjoyable way. I'm anticipating like a fair amount of this staging to involve moments of kind of physical encounter without verbalization, and so how those moments get described for listeners is going to be quite interesting. But yeah, those are certainly elements that I would like to include. If captioning seems like one of the more appropriate options to offer in a certain setting, then certainly trying to arrange that as well. As far as printing of programs, some different versions of them. We would have some large print at least. I would say. It is absolutely a goal for me, again, particularly given this centering a disabled audience and community so much, to work out ways to make it as accessible as possible. I do have to say though, I don't think I could as easily push like age restrictions, because the content will be considered adult. And so, yeah, this is not going to be a work for the disabled youth. That's something else another day.
Thank you.
On the topic of thank you for reminding me, and on the topic of closed captioning, I'm sorry, I should have asked at the beginning for people to introduce themselves. If I could maybe ask anyone who's asked a question to just do a quick introduction, partly for posterity, so interested parties watching the video will know who we are and can look us up, but also so that when we do closed caption this, we can link people to the question. So I don't think I ever actually said I'm Ryan Patterson, I'm a research associate and lecture with the Carleton University Disability Research Group. So hello, and I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Drea. I'm a University of Ottawa master's student in the in theater theory and dramaturgy, finishing my master's there.
Great, welcome, Drea. And if the four of you could maybe do a quick just hello and an introduction.
Sure. I'm Helen Davis. I'm head of English here at Newman University.
Hi, I'm Nina Worthington. I'm doing a PhD in looking at directors and disabled actors working together in mainstream theatre.
I'm Wesley Ralston, Master's MRes student, looking at the playwright Edward Bond.
I'm Kate Kitakios, Newman University Drama Department, and I write about drama and desire.
Great, thank you. And no one else here asked questions, but if anyone would like to call out the name. Right, okay. Right. Okay, great. Well, thank you. I didn't want to be singling anyone out. Okay, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for staying extra time as well. I think there's a really great talk and a really good dialogue afterwards. So thank you again to Celia, and another round of applause. Great talk and engaging seminar. And thank you, and we'll hopefully get to do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
Great seeing you all.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Cheers.